I think it is about time to have a conversation about Gojo vs Sukuna. This fight has been going on for what, 2.5, 3 months, probably longer now. It's about 10 odd chapters in total, and it's still going. This isn't a bad thing. It's just, there's a lot to cover, there's a lot to talk about. As much as I enjoy the fight, I also have some gripes with it. Not to mention the split within the community that it's caused. Either you're Team Gojo or you're Team Sukuna. Every single week you clash and something else happens to either character, and it's a snowball effect on Twitter. It's honestly kind of funny to watch, but also a little bit sad when people take it too far. There's no middle ground, but that's just the community in general. I want to preface this by saying that I have not been reading Kaisen weekly. Shocking. I know, you're probably going to say you're missing out, and I agree I am, but for some reason I just cannot read it weekly anymore. I don't know why. I've tried to figure out why I can't do it weekly. Maybe it's to do with the story, maybe it's to do with the fight that's going on, maybe it's to do with personal stuff with myself and just being busy or having my attention and focus elsewhere for other stories and videos, etc. I don't really know. So the most logical thing I could do was go back and read the fight. And I did. I started basically right from the beginning, a little bit before it, and all the way to the recent stuff with Black Flash. Very exciting. I enjoy the fight. I really do. I think the split between the community is kind of funny because Gojo and Sukuna are such powerful individuals on their own merits. Like the way they handle cursed energy, RCT, domain expansions, amplifications, simple domains, the intricacies of all of those things is really fascinating. Like I enjoy hearing about those things and learning about them, and when they're applied so differently between both of these characters, it creates this kind of power vacuum that is solely surrounding them. This is something that Akutami, for me, has built very directly into the core of its story, specifically with Gojo. He has always been a pillar of this sorcery world, and without him, we've seen the results of it. It's chaos. So just him being there, just him active in the world is like a ceiling for cursed energy. Sukuna either sits kind of directly with him or in this unknown period that's way above him. Hey, can you leave a like and subscribe, please? I'd appreciate that. And I don't mean that power-wise, but I guess more so knowledge. The understanding of cursed energy. And I guess this would just boil down to my perception of Sukuna. I think he's a very powerful character, arguably the strongest in the story alongside Gojo. That's kind of the roles they play, that's kind of the point. But I believe the reason why he's the strongest isn't just to do with the sheer amount of cursed energy or power he can utilize, but more so the finesse that he's able to control it with, the understanding, the knowledge, and sometimes that overwhelming amount of knowledge can be infinitely scarier than someone throwing out a massive attack. I like this. Gojo is extremely intelligent within his own right, but Sukuna has time, 1,000+ years prior to Gojo even existing, to learn, to adapt, to evolve, to understand so many different aspects of life, cursed energy, curses, all of these things. Now Sukuna may not have had the capabilities to practice it, to wield it within his own hands, but that doesn't mean he's forgot it. A great example is Push within this fight actually, with how quick Sukuna is able to learn about Gojo's abilities, specifically the RCT on burnout, cursed energy, and cursed techniques. We have never seen this before. We didn't know it was a thing. We don't know if Sukuna can do it. So when it's implemented by Gojo, there's this weird understanding if Sukuna either already knows it, which is impressive in itself, or he's actively learning it. Either of those options is really scary. I like to think that he was actively learning a lot of the things that Gojo was doing, because it seems like the type of character Sukuna is. There's a video I made a while back between these two talking about love, and that the love of the fight raises things exponentially. That two characters could be pretty standard when it comes to power-wise, but just the sheer amount of competition, the thrill, the love of fighting in itself raises their bar higher, raises their skill set higher. They want to learn, they want to compete, they absolutely love and adore fighting. Funny enough, this fits perfectly with Sukuna's personality and his whole mantra of sacrificing everything else for sheer aggression and power. And every character that is observing and analyzing this fight, learning new things as well, explicitly states that Gojo is just on a different level. Everything that we knew about Gojo was only a fraction of what these characters are currently witnessing, and they didn't even know he could do half of these things. The way that he can switch between different domain properties, for example, on on the fly, the way that he can adjust and utilize his curse techniques, his blue, his red, his infinity, the RCT healing and adapting that to cursed energy burnout, and all of these incredibly detailed and intricate concepts that have been always present within the story but never intermingled with each other. So we know all of these things separately, but now they're combining in a way that we've never seen, and this is just something Gojo has learned because of his Six Eyes capabilities. Sukuna is keeping up with all of this, so that in itself is already an impressive feat, but if he is learning, which it does seem like he is, this fight isn't going to end easy. If anything, it's going to get more aggressive, more sporadic, more chaotic, and I love the fact that Akutami has got the domain expansions mostly out of the way. We shouldn't see them realistically anytime soon unless there's some sort of break or breather for this fight. There was a period of time where people didn't like those domain expansions, and I can understand why, because they're kind of utilized the same way and it becomes more of not a showcase of power, but more of a showcase of who's more intelligent, who uses the domain expansion more effectively in the intricacies of its design rather than its overwhelming power. They're equals at the end of the day, so you have to approach this fight as equals. No one's really going to overpower anyone else, so how do you switch it up? I'm impressed that Akutami was able to take this direction, because what you get now is a fight that doesn't rely on domain expansions, that barely relies on big flashy techniques that's devouring the entire city, but instead it becomes more intimate, it becomes personal. This is a playground of hand-to-hand combat that is so compelling and intoxicating to indulge within. You just don't know the limitations of these characters, even though you start to see the sprinkle of it. You start to see the top of what they're capable of. There's still so much room for refinement. What's scary for me about all of this is that Sukuna recently just got knocked out. For the first time within this fight, he took, I would say, arguably the most damage, and it didn't come from a big, crazy technique, hollow purple or a red or a blue, whatever. It came from a black flash. We already know the capabilities of a black flash. We know how it raises your attack power by this much percentage, which is crazy for anyone, but when you apply that to Gojo, that example is just something we've never witnessed before. This hurts. Arguably, this is the toughest thing that Sukuna has tanked head on, mind you. But of course, what comes out and kind of mitigates this whole thing, Mahoraga. Currently, he is the one that we directly fear. Sukuna has held back quite a lot, I would say. Not that he's giving Gojo a chance, but I don't think he's really been pushed to that limit as of yet, but this black flash will most likely awaken it. Mahoraga seems to be the real issue, being able to adapt to infinity, which once that is gone, and it seems like it basically is with the injuries that Gojo takes, then the real game begins, the real fight. Deep down, I really hope this is round one of their fight, which might sound crazy because of the length that we've had with it, but this fascination that I have with Sukuna having forearms, having two faces, having his tools and his weaponry being the peak of his body, and knowing that it's kind of just there chilling, makes me want it to evolve to that stage. Surely there has to be a moment where this switches into the next gear. It doesn't have to, but I would hope for it. The idea of seeing a unhinged Gojo, very similar to his Toji interaction, and a Sukuna that is so enthralled and fascinated with learning Gojo and devouring him, as a fighter that is standing on his equal, the love of that fight makes me excited. To me, that's kind of symbolic as well. Gojo within that mindset is visualized as an angel. He's very angelic, very heavenly. That's kind of the whole point. Sukuna likes to represent that same theme, being an honored one, a true one, but obviously he's a lot more demonic. He's a lot more evil and aggressive, and you can say that they represent both sides of the sorcery world. Now, I've been talking very highly about the fight and everything that's gone on within it, but I want to express some negatives, and there's not many. Don't blast me for it. It's only a couple. The biggest one for me is the amount of observers. I'm personally not a fan of this. I think Akutami does a great job extrapolating information, drip feeding it down different characters' perspectives, and then giving it to you on a nice silver platter. But for me, it takes away too much of Gojo vs Sukuna. realistically you'd want it to be a balancing act. If you're trying to supply a lot of information from an outside perspective viewing this, you want to carefully balance that knowledge that you're about to obtain with what is being shown in that fight. The problem for me at least is that sometimes that information just either adds nothing to your overall understanding or it adds too much to your overall understanding. So you can't necessarily appreciate the beauty of this fight going on and its evolution step by step because the amount of observers that are about to add their own perspective to it. Now again, I can acknowledge and even appreciate the fact that the observers, everyone, there's like 5, 10, all of them just watching this fight, conflict with each other. So if they say something, they learn something, they're explaining what Gojo's ability is or what he's currently doing, someone's going to chime in. Like if Akatami stripped it in half just to ease up on the amount of information currently trying to be force-fed to you just so you can understand what Gojo is doing, I'd be okay with that. I'd also be completely fine in not fully understanding or having abilities completely, entirely explained to me in such excruciating details. I get a lot of people like that stuff because they want to know how abilities works, but sometimes I would rather let the artistry and the fight itself explain it to me. Again, I want to reiterate, this isn't the worst thing. This isn't a fault of Kaisen or a fault of Akatami, this is more so just personal. That is my biggest concern, my biggest issue that I have. It's not the craziest one, it's one to easily look past, just a lot of information to take in. Is it nitpicking? You could argue that. I could add in a legitimate nitpick and say that the amount of abilities that Gojo actually has that has never really been referenced before or even talked about or even mentioned. And lastly, I wish other characters were doing other things. There is a merger about to happen with Kenjaku, and of course Gojo and Sukuna is the biggest fight of this story, and kind of everything lynches on whether or not this is successful or not, and they're all kind of just waiting there on standby to fight Sukuna. But realistically, we all know that if Gojo is or were to lose, that no other character would really stand a chance. It doesn't really breathe much believability or hope. Even though Kashimo has that technique that he's saving purposefully for Sukuna, even though other people trained for this moment, I wish they would kind of prioritize the grand picture, but I can understand why it's all focused here. And of course we have a bunch of other fights to go through, so again, it isn't all too crazy. There's just a lot of things to balance currently. It's hard to tell how Akatami wants to balance these final moments, what he's going to give more importance to, because there's a lot of other fights to go down. A lot of people here just idly waiting to be split off into their fights, and I don't know how we get to that point, but I guess that is the most exciting thing about it.